Welcome to the OJT series of training videos meant to educate and guide you in the new ECMS format. This video will demonstrate how to complete and submit the monthly trainee evaluation form, formerly known as the EO-365. The function of the screens in ECMS are identical, although the appearance is obviously a little different. I'm going to assume that the user has a passing knowledge of standard functionality in ECMS. I'll be using the same project and prime contractor as was used in the EO-363 and EO-364 worksheet videos. I'll begin by logging in as the prime contractor for the project. And again, this will be the same prime contractor I used in the other videos. From here, you simply go to Construction Projects, type in your project number, and once on the project information screen, you'll go to the Construct column, and at the very bottom, you'll have the Trainee Monthly Evaluation Report, EO-365. Simply click on this, and you'll be taken into the EO-365 list. Now, there won't be anything displayed here immediately, so go up to your Gray toolbar and click on the New button. Once you do this, a list of all the people who have had an EO-363 or 364 approved will appear here. As I've only done a 364 for one person, I only have one selectee. I'll simply click that Add button, and you'll be brought into the EO-365 screen. Now, a lot of the information here should look familiar based on the information you entered on the 363 and 364. You'll notice that right away we have instructions, and there's two lines here, and they're worth mentioning. It says this report is to be completed monthly by the contractor for each trainee employed on this project, under the training special provisions. So obviously, if you have, say, for instance, 3 trainees, you'll need to be filling out 3 of these per month. To be submitted for the duration of each training classification by the 5th day following the end of the pay period prior to the 30th of the month. Basically, let's say this is April, so the April report would be due by May 5th. Pretty simple. The second line, if the contractor is experiencing any difficulties with the trainee at any time, the IIC must be notified immediately. And the IIC shall be notified at the end of a termination or completion by filing an EO-365 report at that time, regardless of the calendar date. So outside of doing the monthly submissions, if you're running into any issues with that particular trainee, what you're going to want to do is fill out an EO-365 and submit it to the IIC, even if you had just done the monthly one a few days prior, or if the monthly one is going to be due in a few days, you still need to fill one out, what we'll call an interim EO-365. Now that we've touched on those two important pieces of information, let's look at the rest of the form, including some of the fields that have to be completed and some of the information contained therein. You'll notice the first thing that we have to select in the trainee information section is reporting period. The first report that you submit, this reporting period will have to be selected. But after that first one, all others will increment 1 month automatically. So if you're submitting for April, the next time you create one, May will automatically be selected. Now, you might ask, what happens if my trainee doesn't start on time? What do I do then? Okay, and here's the answer. The first eval period is to include the BEO approved start date, which is set when the BEO approves the trainee enrollment. In this case, as you might remember, April 19th, 2021 was that expected start date. Now, if the trainee does not start as expected, you must still submit a report for each month from when they were expected, which is the BEO approved start date. So let's say this particular trainee is supposed to start April 19th, or at the very least the month of April, but for some reason he doesn't start until May. That being the case, you must still submit an evaluation report in EO-365 for the month of April. So my reporting period would be April 2021. My ending date would be April 30th, and you'll notice that this is a required field. And at that point, the information for this section will be complete. Now, there are a few more fields down here. You'll notice that they're not highlighted in yellow, but they may be required depending on the situation. If we look at the verbiage right here, if any of the training information is changed, update below. And of course, it's always possible that someone can change their name, and it's not at all uncommon that somebody might move. So if the name, gender, address, phone number, any of this information has changed since the 364 or even the last 365 was submitted, you'll update the information here. And then when you submit this report and it's approved, that information for that particular trainee will be updated in the system. Now let's look at the next section, training information. So we can see some of the information that was approved on the 364 has been brought over. But some of the fields that you'll still have to enter, date training started. Let's just assume this person started on the date they were intending. We also have employee status upgraded trainee. Now, if nothing has happened here, if this particular employee trainee hasn't been upgraded, there's no modifications, you could simply leave it blank or even select no. And if you do that, nothing else needs done. However, if I select yes, that this employee has in fact been upgraded, if I hit the save button, you'll notice that we have X's beside the new pay rate and new fringe benefit, which tells us if we are upgrading this trainee, then obviously we need to enter those two pieces of information. You'll also notice that if we upgrade a trainee, comments will be required. Now, if I would happen to select no and hit save, you'll notice that the X's on these three fields disappear, meaning they are no longer required. However, you'll notice that these three, which are in yellow and have a yellow flag, are always going to be required. And even though comments are not required, comments can still be entered. The next field to be considered is the current hours of training reporting. And this, of course, is all the hours that our apprentices worked between April 19th and April 30th. In this case, we're going to say this individual worked 75 hours. The second field is the summary of specific tasks performed. It probably doesn't hurt to list item numbers here, but at the very least, you want a detailed description of what this individual has done. And of course, this is sort of your supporting evidence that their apprenticeship hours count toward their goal. I'm simply going to put in some generic information. And the third field is evaluation of trainee. And this will be the contractor's evaluation of the trainee's performance. And of course, the IIC will need to agree with this later, so make sure it's accurate. And again, I'm just going to be entering some generic information. Our final section is the evaluation report detail section. And here you'll see that your very first field is your final report. And what it's asking is whether or not this is that particular trainee's final report. Meaning if you submitted maybe 10 reports, and this is either their last report due to completing the program, or a last report due to maybe issues that you've been having with the trainee, this is a simple yes or no. In most cases, this will not be your final report. That should only happen once per project. And seeing as how this is our very first submission, we should be marking no. Now you notice that we have several fields here that are required. The final report, of course, is always required, as is the report prepared by, and this is the member of the prime contractor who is completing this report, and their representative title. In this case, we'll just enter a generic name, and the representative title, there is actually a very wide selection of titles to select from, so regardless of the layout or structure of your particular company, one of these should in fact work. I'm just going to pick secretary for this one. And at this point, I could click save, and the information would be locked in. Now you'll notice as soon as I fill out all of the original required fields in the first 3 sections and click save, you'll see that an attachment section opens up. You'll also see a print as PDF button similar to what we saw on the EO-364. And if you're guessing it has the same functionality, you would be correct. So in this case, I'm going to click the print as PDF button, and what that's going to do is open a PDF with all of the information that I just entered. And again, just a bit of a warning. If you're the contractor or maybe the IIC or anybody reviewing this document and you see information that is either missing and or incorrect, please do not correct it on the PDF. If corrections need made, please go to the EO-365 in ECMS, send it back for revision, and make your corrections there. Only because any corrections made on a PDF in this format will not be uploaded to our database, and therefore that trainee in our database will have incomplete tracking information. That being said, simply review the PDF here, and if it's correct, you'll give it to your candidate, in this case John Doe II, for a signature and a date. As this is only testing, I'm not actually going to do any of the signing, but I will save it really quickly on my desktop. And then once that is saved, you would simply come back into here, enter whatever attachment title and description you feel is applicable, and we also have to select our document type. Now, unlike the EO-364, which had many different types under this dropdown, we only have 2. We have the Signed Trainee Monthly Report, which is what we just looked at and saved, and then similar to the EO-364, you also have a justification category. And this category can be really any information which may be applicable to this particular monthly report submission. Now, I'm not going to be selecting that. I think we're good with just the signed page. So I'm going to select Signed Trainee Monthly Report, and I'm going to browse for the PDF that I just saved. And at this point, you would click Save. And you'll notice that this attachment is now part of the EO-365. And at this point, I'll save again. It never hurts to save. Now, before I actually submit this for review, there is one thing that I would like to point out. Remember earlier when we were talking about the trainee information section, I said that even if the trainee didn't start until May in this case, we would still need to enter a report for April because that is when they were supposed to start. So even if they start after the month they were supposed to start, that first month is still going to need a report. The only difference is if they didn't actually perform any work in April, you would not need the attachment. Obviously, if they didn't do any work, there would be no hours to report, no summary of specific tasks, and no evaluation of the trainee. So effectively, there really would be no EO-365 report to review. So even if you have to fill in what we'll call a blank submission, you don't have to attach a document. Of course, if the trainee performed any work that month, even if it was just a quarter of an hour, attachment will be required. So now that we have all that information, let's go up to our grade toolbar. We'll hit Workflow and Submit. And of course, we'll have a message from webpage detailing some of the information that we might want to review. And once we review that, we'll click OK. And you'll notice that our status has gone from draft to IIC review. I'm now going to log out as the prime contractor and log in as the IIC. I'm now logging in as the inspector in charge. And similar to the other worksheets that were submitted, I can go to construction projects and go through the front door, as we call it, or I can use the work queue functionality, which is what I'm going to demonstrate now. So if I click on work queue, I would scroll down till I get to the evaluation report review EO-365, and clicking on that link will bring up all of the EO-365 submissions that are currently ready for IIC review. In this case, I would scroll down till I find the project in question, and as we can see, it is in fact the one that we just submitted. And similar to the other forms, I can review all of the information, but I cannot actually add or modify anything. The one thing I can also do is click on this attachment to open it up, review the information, which should match what was just on the screen. But probably more importantly, I want to make sure that there's a signature here. Now, obviously, there's not a signature on this one because it's just a test, but in real life, of course, we would be expecting to see John Doe's signature attached. That being said, all I would do at this point is go to Workflow on the gray toolbar and either click Approve or Revise. If I chose Revise to kick it back into a revision status, of course I would have to enter comments, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm simply going to click Approve, and the status goes from IIC review to DLCCA review. I'm now going to log out and log in as the DLCCA. I'm now logged in as the DLCCA. Similar to the IIC, I'm going to be using my work queue to access the EO-365. In this case, there's only one project, which happens to be the one we submitted. Similar to the IIC and the DLCCA's review responsibilities for other forms, you notice that we cannot actually edit, add, change anything of that nature. Again, similar to the IIC, the only thing we can actually do is open the trainee attachment, verify any information in here as well as the signature, and then close out again. We also have the Approve and Revise options for the workflow, but in this case, I'm going to simply click Approve. We now go from DLCCA review to BEO review, which is the final step in the process. I'm going to log out and log in as the BEO rep. Now that the first submission has been approved, let's log back in as the prime contractor and go back into the EO-365 link under the Construct column. The submission that was just reviewed and approved is now listed as a record, and if we click on the name, we can see all the information that we had previously entered and reviewed, as well as the workflow for the review and approval down below. And any such records, monthly or otherwise, that are approved will be found here as well. Now that being said, there's one more thing I would like to show you, and that is what we're going to call the final monthly submission for an apprentice. I'm going to go to my gray toolbar and click on New, and again, this will be pretty much everything we did before. We're going to select John Doe as our trainee. We're going to say, and you'll notice before how I said you would enter the first reporting period and everything else would be automatically filled in. Since our first report was April, May is automatically populated, and you'll note that you can also not change this. So I'm going to go to my ending date. We'll say May 31st, and none of this information down here has changed. I'm just going to enter some generic information. Because what I really want to show is in the last section, the evaluation report details section. Now, whereas before I selected no for my final report, this time I'm going to select yes. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that the trainee/training status now becomes a required field. And if I hit that drop down, we have 4 different options. We have complete, which simply means that the trainee has completed their 1,000 hours and they are now done with that apprenticeship program. They resigned, meaning they willingly quit the company or quit the program. Termination, meaning they were, for whatever reason, let go. Or training is simply on hold. And of course, this can be for a bevy of options. In this case, I'm going to simply put complete. We'll say their last day of training was May 31st. And for reason, I'm just going to put completed program. But of course, if it were some other reason, such as resignation or termination, or especially training on hold, of course, we could expand on those comments. And regardless of what we put in those other boxes, we would still use the same information for these drop-down. There is one other box too, which is anticipated recall date. Now this would pretty much only be used if the training were on hold. If the training were completed, the person resigned, or they were terminated, obviously no recall would be expected. So if training on hold is selected as an option, and you click Save, you'll see that that anticipated recall date now becomes a required field. But in this case, we're going to simply select Complete, and you'll notice that if I save, that goes away. The anticipated recall date is no longer required. So with all that said, and again, of course, I would have to print as a PDF. I'm going to save again. And then attach. And again, this is pretty much identical to the first submission that I showed you at the beginning of the training video. It's just this happens to be the last submission for this particular trainee who's completed the program. And once that's in there, I'll go up to Workflow, Submit. And again, this would start the review process. I have gone through the first 2 review steps behind the scenes, and I am now logged in as the BEO rep for review and approval of the final monthly report for this apprentice. I'm going to go to Work Queue, EO-365, and go to the project of interest. Now you'll remember I mentioned specifically for the first submission, which was a non-final submission, that unlike the 363 and the 364, in this case the BEO had no additional information to enter. But now that we're on the final submission for the apprentice in question, that will change. Whereas before the BEO just reviewed and either approved or rejected the information that was present, they now have to make several designations. You'll notice that all this information here is the same, but there is now a 4th section called Beo Recommendation. The first drop-down is Training Program Evaluation, and this is going to say whether it was complete, incomplete, a program replacement, or a trainee replacement. In this case, we're going to select Complete. After that, we have Trainee Evaluation Satisfactory, simply either a yes or a no. In this case, we'll select yes. The third one would be Issue Certification, and this can either be a certificate of completion, a certificate of participation, meaning it wasn't completed, although some work was done, or nothing. In this case, because it was completed and it was completed satisfactorily, we're going to select completion for our certification issuance. And again, some of these other ones may require different rules. And if you're ever in doubt, simply contact your DLCCA rep in the district. and they can advise you further. And I'm going to go with complete, satisfactory, and completion certificate issuance. And from here I go to workflow and approve. And our final monthly report for this particular apprentice is now approved. There is one last thing I'd like to demonstrate before this video is completed. I'm currently logged in as the prime contractor, and I'm going to navigate to my project. And I'm going to select my EO-365 link in the construct column. You'll notice that, of course, we have our first, and in this case, our second and final report. And you'll notice that over here under final report, we have a nice indicator of no versus yes. This is going to help us determine whether or not a final report was ever submitted, and in this case, approved. Now, if I go up to new, you'll notice that John Doe still actually appears as a trainee that can be selected. However, if I hit that add button, as we might expect, I get an error message saying cannot create new reports for trainee once final report has been submitted. This should be common sense, as because we've submitted the final report, we can no longer submit further reports. So just a warning to the contractors, before you select final versus non-final, make sure that that program is complete and/or that particular trainee will no longer be doing any work for the project.